My personal theory, however far-fetched, is that Chrollo is attempting to steal Bungie Gum from Hisoka. Alright, to be fair, most Hisoka theories are pretty far-fetched. Illumi is Hisoka, Chrollo is Hisoka, but Nolanov is Hisoka. And that one turned out to be real. Just to explore this, so I suppose it would be a way to guarantee that Hisoka does stay dead because there would be no Bungie Gum to revive him. And it's also entirely possible that without Bungie Gum in his possession, Hisoka's body just falls apart because a ton of it is Bungie Gum and texture surprise prosthetics at this point. So in that case, the condition to steal a legendary treasure could be an extra one that Chrollo has imposed on himself. My thinking so far is that that was a condition involved in the ability that he wants to steal. If anything, it would be an extra condition imposed on himself so that Skill Hunter is able to steal something very powerful, like, say, a post-mortem Nen ability. And Chrollo is very capable of self-negotiation, like how he conjured the double-face bookmark to use in his fight against Hisoka by setting himself a bunch of annoying restrictions, most of which we are not yet aware of. So I don't know, I don't think this is hugely likely at the moment, but it would make the inevitable Chrollo versus Hisoka fight incredibly exciting. Because instead of killing Hisoka as effectively as possible, as we saw in Heaven's Arena, Chrollo's goal now changes to stealing Bungie Gum, and I think that paves the way for a very different and much more interesting fight. Not that the first Chrollo vs Hisoka fight wasn't interesting. I think it's one of the best written fights in all of manga. But we can't just replay that for the next encounter. We've got to do something new, and this would be a solid way to do that. Am I the only one who thinks post-mortem Nen is on the table for Chrollo? Definitely not, because I've had similar thoughts. Because we're seeing a very familiar dark recklessness here, something that we have seen previously in Gon and Kurapika, and generally that hasn't gone particularly well for them. Chrollo is a man completely willing to throw his life away, which is the most powerful possible bargaining chip for Nen use, especially because he believes so adamantly that the spider will survive and thrive after his death. And I think there's only one way that Chrollo actually survives this arc, and that is entirely dependent on how cruel Togashi wants to be with this character. Because for Chrollo, death is not the worst possible thing that could happen to him. The worst thing would be watching his friends and colleagues, his fellow spiders, die one by one all around him, and having Chrollo being completely powerless to stop it. Just like how he was powerless to stop Sarasa's death when they were children. And so Chrollo would have to watch everything he's built and worked for torn apart, in the cases of people, probably quite literally, because Hisoka was not kind with the bodies of Shinnok and Kotopi. But Chrollo would watch everything he sacrificed his life for, everything he committed the most heinous of sins for, all of that disappear right before his eyes and really emphasize the futility of life. Because in the end, what was it all in service of? Nothing. All it did was cause more pain and tragedy. We're very potentially in that territory. But if not, then I can definitely imagine Chrollo's death resulting in a post-mortem Nen ability being left that can only be used by members of the Phantom Troop. Perhaps Skill Hunter manifests and remains in the human realm with all of the abilities that Chrollo has captured over his lifespan, making sure that part of him is always around to protect and guide his friends. Here's the thing though, whatever Chrollo's ending is probably informs us about Kurapika's ending, because they do have these parallel journeys. The whole sustaining tragedies as a child and then dedicating their lives to revenge, they're extremely similar, and if Kurapika isn't careful, if he becomes consumed by revenge like Chrollo is, then he could end up on very much the same path. However, Kurapika has had more moments of light in his life that make him think twice about going full Chrollo, one of which is his OG friendship group with Gon, Killua, and Leorio, but most recently the bond he's formed with 14th Prince Worbel, showing us that Kurapika now has to choose between working towards revenge for the past or working towards preventing tragedy in the future and ending this entire cycle. Which isn't to say that Kurapika is safe in this arc. Togashi has said on one occasion that both Kurapika and the Phantom Troop will die by the end of the series. Although because it was written in text, it's hard to tell what the tone of that was. Could have been very jokey, like, oh, they'll all die. But then again, it is Togashi, I don't know. But look, if Kurapika does die, it'll definitely be a lot more, how shall I put this, restful than Chrollo? Like a job well done instead of a putting an end to your misery. Do you think Chrollo is using the phone ability to find Hisoka, or the person who has the ability he wants to steal? Alright, so assuming that they're not the same person, that's actually a very good question. Without seeing the criteria that Chrollo input, there's no way of knowing that at the moment, and there's very sound reasoning to argue either way. Chrollo's not ready to fight Hisoka at the moment, however, using the phone to track Hisoka could be a solid straightforward maneuver for Chrollo to simply make sure that Hisoka doesn't find him before he's ready with the ability. Then there's the idea that he's trying to track the person with the Nen ability he needs, which makes sense because that's a much more immediate goal than finding Hisoka, but there could also be a third option. Because theoretically, there's not even really a point in trying to find the person with the ability right now, because we still haven't filled the basic criteria. Chrollo still needs to do the prerequisite of stealing a legendary treasure. So perhaps the person who Chrollo is dialing is someone he knows is close to the Kakian relics, or trying to find someone close to them, because that is the first step. He needs to get his hands on one of those, but whoever he's calling, they're definitely on tier 1. Not that that really helps, because we know that Hisoka, the relics, and almost certainly the ability holder are all there anyway, so you know what, it could still be anyone. Kurapika wants to stop the contest, and Chrollo is here to do exactly that. They are probably getting matched. And there we have it. That is the link that I've been waiting for, because the desires of Kurapika and Chrollo at the moment are more or less in concert. Chrollo needs to steal one of the Kakian relics, which will compromise the succession contest, and Kurapika wants to find a way to compromise that context. Relics be damned, I don't care about any of you. And imagine what a huge character moment that would be if Kurapika were to put aside the slaughter of the Kurt clan to join forces with the man who ruined his life, all so that he can save Baby Wobo. And can you imagine what an intellectual powerhouse that would create? The combined efforts of Chrollo and Kurapika, they would become nigh on undefeatable. So much so that I'm now very quietly hoping that this happens and that we have a full reversal of York New City, where these parties come together to mutually end the cycle of tragedy. Stop the Benolanov slander. This all could have been avoided if Lynch kept her hands to herself. You know what? There is actually a very important lesson about consent here. Lynch would not be dead right now if she wasn't just punching random dudes all over the ship. Keep your hands to yourself. But the greatest shame here, and what proves that maybe we shouldn't be splitting up this much, is that the Phantom Troop actually have an extremely easy solution to this problem in Shizuku, whose entire Nen ability is dedicated to stuff like corpse disposal and transportation and hiding things, and she was originally with Benolanov after the troop split up on tier 1. And look, let's give them all their rightful glazing. The Phantom Troop are undoubtedly one of the most insanely powerful group of Nen users to have ever existed on this planet, second only to the Royal Guard, who don't really count because they're all dead now, and maybe you could make an argument that they're second to the Zodiacs, but the Phantom Troop potentially outclass even them. And that's because the Phantom Troop act as a group. The Zodiacs, they're all individually strong, but they don't work together. They're just one big political mess put together by a man who wanted to make his ideal group of sparring partners, not too unlike Hisoka and his desire for a chest full of toys. But when you think about the concept of the spider, it only works because the spider is a whole. It doesn't really function when you just lop off and send out a lone leg into the world. It just sits there and flails. And that is when the troop is most vulnerable. I don't think there is a single living person or group currently out there who could take on the entire Phantom Troop at once. However, there's no shortage of people who can take them out individually. All it takes is one bad Nen matchup from a relatively proficient user and it's done. Which is why I'm so terrified that the group only continues to fracture. And all because of Chrollo's orders. The head of the spider is dismantling the rest of the spider. And in his mind, he's going, everything will be fine, the spider's going to continue without me as a whole. It's not, because you're lopping off all the legs and telling them to do all this weird shit. He's the one who gave permission to this first come first serve system, and he's also the one who asked Benolanov to act on his own. And we're already seeing the extreme limitations of solo troop work, because Benolanov 1 is simply dead if Hisoka catches him, and 2, he didn't have the necessary skills to cover his tracks with Lynch. That's Shizuku's dedicated job. And now, as a result of that, an entire mafia faction is about to declare war on them, whilst they declare war on a separate faction. And the faction that they are working for has a traitor within them who is working for one of the other factions. So this individual troop business, I don't think it's working out well for them. The match Chrollo got for that ability is Sheila. I'm calling it. You know, this seems like an insane thought, but I'm not discounting it. Sheila was very deliberately brought into the Phantom Troop flashback in the last batch, and we can't just ignore a long-lost childhood friend in an arc that seems to be partially dedicated to wrapping up the entire Phantom Troop storyline. Plus, you can't ignore any small details in that specific flashback, like how we saw Soradnik's tattoo artist as one of the child abductors. And there's also that theory that Sheila betrayed the Phantom Troop and was actually working with the abductors, as well as the separate theory that she may have played a part in the Kurta clan massacre. Because remember, Sheila has a connection to both Chrollo and Kurapika, which makes her something of a narrative nexus point. So maybe Chrollo is looking for Sheila, who has now become a hunter just like she always dreamed and has this absurdly powerful Nen ability. Maybe that's why he's keeping the number 9 spot open to invite her in. Or maybe it's just because he's grieving over Pakunoda and doesn't want to fill the spot of his one sort of love. But maybe, and this is what I'm hoping, that we'll finally figure out why all of the everything happened. I really can't understand why people even think of the troop after everything they've done. They literally deserve to die on board. It's not so much that I want them to survive because I think they deserve it, these good people, they shouldn't die. Let's be very clear here, each and every member of the Phantom Troop deserves death. Even the members that aren't really members like Illumi and Kalito. Because they've all done unforgivable things that there is absolutely no excuse for. But it's a credit to Togashi's writing that he can still make me and so many others feel empathy for them. Because they're a found family with strong bonds and a truly horrifying backstory that doesn't absolve their actions in any way, but they make sense. You can follow the logic of how they reach that endpoint. They're not evil for the sake of evil. And in fact, they even challenge the very notion of what evil is. Because we as people tend to treat evil as a separate concept from humanity, as if the two of them don't naturally mix. If you're evil, you're not human, you're some sort of demon. And if you're human, then you can't be evil. When in reality, the idea of evil only exists within one species, and look, it's us. So I think that Togashi has done a really good job of integrating evil and humanity within the Phantom Troop, and it produces some very awesome, very complicated feelings, which makes them compelling and interesting characters that have a lot more to latch onto than, your standard good guy or your standard bad guy. Not that those archetypes really exist in Hunter x Hunter, but that's my complicated relationship to these particular fictional characters. And you know what? Here's another complication. I'm also actively rooting for Henry in this scenario, who has all but declared open hostilities on the troop and vowed to kill at least Benolanov, I suppose, for killing Lynch. And Henry's a complicated guy as well. He's not clean by any means, but he has that same compelling nature. And I guess the really satisfying thing about Hunter x Hunter is watching those compelling characters clash. The arc on the boat seems so unbelievably complicated, I have no idea how it could possibly wrap up in a way that is satisfying. So, the funny thing is, Togashi's probably thinking the exact same thing. When he revealed his 4 potential endings for Hunter x Hunter, it really showed us a lot about how much Togashi considers the readers and often compromises his own desires to ensure that they receive some satisfaction with his desired conclusions. In case you don't know, Togashi had 4 endings planned for Hunter x Hunter. He's now reduced that to 3, and we have one ending that he wants to do which he predicts that most people will hate. He also has an ending in mind that he predicts most readers will enjoy, but he doesn't really want to go down that path. And then there's a third option, which is a compromise between the two. And if I had to guess, I would say that's how the Chimera Ant arc ended up as well, with this mix of bittersweet brilliance. A compromise between Togashi's more bleak desires and the perceived desire of optimism from the readers. But there's also a point in the Chimera Ant arc where all of the chaos just subsides and we're very much left to fizzle out. It wasn't a big, explosive, climactic finale. It wasn't your standard narrative race to the end. All of the major action was mostly packed into the middle of the palace invasion, and that feels a bit like the trajectory we're on here, just on a much larger scale, because we have significantly more characters to keep track of. I will say now, even if we have no way of knowing how many months or years we are away from this, a lot of people are going to be dissatisfied with the ending of the Succession Contest arc. That's just the nature of Hunter x Hunter. It doesn't do things the standard way, and so people get mixed reactions to that. I myself have had mixed reactions to the endings of certain Hunter x Hunter arcs, and it's taken me a long time to come to terms with some things. But I have complete faith in Togashi, who has now been working on this one arc for 12 years to pull off a Chimera Ant-esque ending that is equal parts beautiful and bleak, and something that will make its mark not just on manga, but hopefully shortly after anime history.